Thank you for the invitation. In my lecture, I would like to speak about the modernization of the states and the international relations in Europe, China, and Japan.
I think
A bit louder.
Well, we have a mic, yeah?
In my lecture, is good so? In my lecture, I would like to speak about modernization of the states and international relations in Europe, China. Yeah, in Europe, China, and Japan. Now is it okay?
It's going to happen.
In the 19th and 20th century. So from the historical point of view. Yep. I would like to compare three civilizations from a point of view of modernization of the states and international relations. The European civilization is based on Roman law and Christian religious culture. The Chinese civilization is based on the Confucian philosophy and Buddhist and Taoist religious culture. And the Japanese civilization is based on the Confucian philosophy and the Buddhist and Shintoist religious culture. Japan has long ago, about 2,200 years ago, adopted traditions from the Chinese civilization because they thought that Chinese civilization is very developed and they adopted the Confucian tradition first of all as their own state organization tradition. Modernization started with the Industrial Revolution in the second part of the 18th century, and it changed the world, changed the feudal system, and a capitalist, liberal capitalist world system developed gradually. This demanded to change the state and international organization and to form an ideology of democratization and human rights. At that time, China and Japan were closed states, but they were forced to open up. China was opened up as a result of the Opium Wars, and Japan was opened up by the American fleet. So could happen that here you can see how the Chinese did see in the 17th century the world. It's the center were China and the European in the center there were Europe and the Atlantic Ocean. So when Igen. So could happen that after the opening of China and Japan, that the famous Japanese educator and modernized Yukichi Fukuzawa could the United States of America as a member of the delegation of the shogunate in 1860. And 2 years later, he could visit the European states. He was in France, in England, in Russia, and also in Portugal. So, and he could realize that the Europeans are industrial, they are business-oriented, they are inventive, but the Japanese, in comparison to the Europeans, were semi-developed, they were agrarian. And he raised the question, how could the European become modern? And he realized that the Europeans in Europe, there is a diversity. There are different states form. There are discussions. There are differences in meaning. There is free thinking. But in Japan, there was no free thinking, no discussions. Japanese lived in 1,000 years old Confucian traditions, and there was a caste system in Japan, and there were no discussions. And he could also realize that the most important difference between the European state and the international organization and the Japanese was that the European state organization was based on the system of liberties, but the Japanese or Confucian-based civilization was based on the Confucian moral principles. The Confucian civilization was founded by Confucius, who lived about 2,500 years ago. His moral principles, his philosophy are highly appreciated in China nowadays too, and were appreciated always. The most important principles of Confucian principles, the most important values and principles of a Confucian moral state are ancestor worship, filial piety, learning, education, self-perfectionism, cultivation of person, moral virtue, gentlemanlike behavior. So you could see that the Confucian civilization was a knowledge-based civilization. In the period before the Opium Wars, China was a well-organized state, agrarian state. At the top there was the imperial government. Beneath the provinces. The provinces were autonomous, and the provinces were divided: districts, prefectures, villages, and the smallest unit was the family and the clans. There were two institutions which are different from the European system. These were the censorate and civil service examination. The civil service examination selected by examination the state officials, testing them on Confucian classics, and the censorate controlled the emperor and officials. And these two institutions and Confucian principles are very important, remained very important in the modernization of China. The most important Chinese modernizers, Kang Yuwei, Sun Yat-sen, and Deng Xiaoping, they by implementing the European system of liberties with critique, they try to safeguard the Confucian principles and censorate and the civil service examination too. This is very important. We will see later. In Europe, the European state and international organization, how I mentioned, was based on the system of liberties. The most important elements of the European, of the Western system of liberties were the following. So sorry, it's something happened. Here is the separation of powers, a representative parliament created by general elections and limited by time, and executive branch, which is responsible to the parliament, an independent judiciary, a free press, a freedom of conscience, assembly, and other civil rights, executive local economy. This is how István Bibó, the famous Hungarian thinker, summarized the most important elements of the European system of liberties in his famous essay on the social development of Europe. The Western system of liberties were used. That was used this system in the case of a state organization and in the case of the international organization too. There was one important idea in the European system of liberties, and this was the personal federalism. Personal federalism was the idea which corresponded to the popular sovereignty and democracy. You can imagine, you can see on this figure how one can imagine personal federalism. In the center there were persons in the center of the state and international organization are the persons, autonomous persons. They create associations and they transfer toward lower levels all those fields which they cannot manage alone. And so are created around the persons different levels of organization, the local community, the province, and the state. And these development can continue above the state too, among the state. By transfer of different common functions toward the larger levels, by sharing sovereignty. So if there is organized a federal government, then people can create a federal republic, like it happened in the case of the United States of America or in the case of Switzerland. It is possible not to create a government. Then they can create multi-level regional unions, like it happened in the case of the European Union. And if they don't want to share sovereignty, then they can create special agencies, coordinating agencies above the states. This is the most important three form of the organization of the state above the state level. The development of the Western system of liberties is well known. The famous events were the Magna Carta, the English Glorious Revolution, which established the constitutional monarchy, the American Revolution established the Federal Republic under President, fighting against colonization, fighting against the English colonization. They rejected feudalism and declared popular sovereignty and created the first democratic state. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of Citizens is well known. The French Revolution created a unitary nation state. The most successful event from the point of view of democratization in the 19th century was the establishment of the Swiss Confederation in the form of a federal republic under a federal government. The development of the Western system of liberties slowed down in the second half of the 19th century, and after the First World War there was a crisis, and after the Second World War the development of the Western system of liberties revived, and the international state organization also revived. So, but the liberal capitalist system, there was one phenomenon which characterized the liberal capitalist system. This was expansion and colonization. But if you search these principles in colonization and the expansion in the 19th century and the second half, the end of the 19th century, in the first half of the 20th century, you cannot find in the European policy. So colonization, the European expansion was not legalized. It was not disciplined. It was laissez-faire, simple laissez-faire. It happened. That was used everything different ways. Wars, might, arms, laissez-faire liberal capitalist expansion, establishment of colonial empires and national empires. So could happen that China was colonized. This cartoon shows, well, what happened with China after China was defeated during the Opium Wars. Here you can see Great Britain, the German Empire, Russia, France, and samurai Japan. They are dividing China. They could do that because of the Annecy treaties. The Annecy treaties gave the possibility to the Western colonial powers to organize foreign settlements in the territory of China, and from these settlements they could colonize China. So could happen that China became the colony of all Western powers and the slave of all Western powers, how the famous modernizer Sun Yat-sen expressed it. So after all this, in China and Japan, also in both, the question was raised: what to do, how to defend independence. The Chinese didn't dare to start to modernize the Confucian system, the 1,000 years old Confucian system. And the answer came from Japan. Yukichi Fukuzawa, a famous Japanese educator, modernizer, launched the project of encouragement of learning. So knowledge-based modernization, a knowledge-oriented modernization, and the aim was to change the Confucian study material, or more precisely enlarge the old Confucian study material with modern Western knowledge. Military technique, economic sciences, financial sciences, and he was for changing the study material and educating the Japanese people to become self-conscious, with independent mind. He was for joining the Western civilization, and he was for saying goodbye to Asia and become Western, but with critique, because of a colonization. The colonization made the Western principles for him ambiguous, very questionable. First of all, morally very questionable, because the moral, the legitimation of colonization in Europe was based on a stereotype of the civilization mission of the most developed Westerners. This was untrue, simple, but he emphasized the necessity to join the Westerners and to implement capitalist enterprises in Japan, to modernize the state system following the English constitutional system. In Japan, the modernization process was successful. The shogunate was changed, and the rule of the emperor was restored, and the Meiji emperor directed the modernization process. The modernization process started with liberal aims. The most important aims were to establish deliberative assemblies, to abolish the evil customs, to abolish the caste system, and to seek knowledge all over the world. Here you can see in Japanese the original Japanese text of the Charter of Oath. But the Japanese state reform was more conservative, was a conservative state reform. Later, the reform became more conservative. It followed the parliament, followed the English example. It was established a two-chamber parliament composed of a House of Representatives and a House of Peers. But the emperor became the sovereign, and below the emperor were the Japanese people. The emperor, so it was established a constitutional monarchy, but with absolutist tendencies. With absolutist tendencies, the rule of the emperor was restricted because he could not govern by ordinances, and was assigned toward liberalism that they involved in the Constitution fundamental rights. Very interesting how they could understand the Western system in this constitutional figure. You can see there how the Japanese tried to implement the Western governmental system, elements from the Western system of liberties, and this is what could they do, what could they achieve. Regarding the educational reform, Fukuzawa could not be successful because the imperial educational reform strengthened the conservative version of Confucianism. Fukuzawa continued the fight for liberalization of Japan, and he established the Keio University. He became an educational entrepreneur, a successful educational entrepreneur, and he is highly appreciated in all days in Japan, and Japanese have chosen to follow his ideas in the future modernization of China, political modernization of China. The Japanese could influence the Chinese. Chinese could realize that it would be necessary to start reforms, but it was late at the end of the 19th century, and in China the reform started also with a knowledge-based, knowledge-oriented modernization. Kang Yuwei, the famous Confucian philosopher, started the reform in China. He proposed to the emperor to change the Confucian examination system and to involve in the study material useful Western knowledge. But there were but he could not gain because this reform emperor was killed. So he was for a titular monarchical republic, that's to reform China into a titular monarchical republic, where the essence was the republic and the monarch was the representative of the unity of the country. He highly appreciated the Western federalist ideas, and he has written a utopia on the universal peace. And he regarded the establishment of the League of Nations as the beginning of the period of rising peace. That he divided history into three periods: the period of disorder, period of rising peace, and the period of universal peace. So we are based on his thinking, we are now in the period of rising peace. But in China, the Confucian philosopher, revolutionary, Sun Yat-sen, could gain. He established the Republic of China, through a revolutionary way, and he became the first president. His ideas are very interesting because he discussed with the Western ideas. This is the period when there was a crisis in Europe regarding the Western system of liberties. He highly appreciated the American system and the Swiss federal system, but he believed that Europeans could not establish popular sovereignty and democracy, and he was in thinking how is it possible to, based on the European ideas, he was involved in the European thinking, and everything was, which was created in this period in China regarding state and international organization was based on the European ideas. His ideas are very interesting, and you could read about his ideas in the three principles of people. Three principles were nationalism, democracy, livelihood. Nationalism meant the established national unity and safeguarding the Confucian heritage, safeguarding the Confucian principles. Livelihood meant for him the establishment of a state capitalism serving the livelihood of a people. And what is very interesting, this is how he imagined a democracy in his five-power constitution. He accepted the European three-power structure, that's the executive, legislative, and judiciary system. But he believed that it would be necessary to enlarge it with the examination system and the censorate. So you can see here the figure of the quintuple power government. There was federalism until the provincial level. People had power of election, recall, initiative, and referendum. And the People's Conference told the government what to do, how to organize the state, how to solve the problems. There were experts, because there was an examination system, and the experts told the people what to do, how to solve the problems. So the governmental power was composed of executive, legislative, judicial, examination, and control power. That is, yes. In the meantime, in Europe, there was a crisis of the Western system of liberties. I think that this crisis was caused because of the fight for power, because of the colonization, fight for colonies, fight for the division of the world between the great European colonial powers. because of the laissez-faire economy, because of the laissez-faire free market capitalist expansion, because this created a fictive economy and central periphery system. And this was the whole world economic system. The first phase of globalization was laissez-faire and fictive. A question raised: what to do? How to organize? How to correct these problems of the World Economic Organization? And the idea was that it was necessary to end laissez-faire and to start functional international economic organization. Functional through functional coordinating agencies above the states, coordinating with the state governments, or it would be better to use federalist principles, to involve also federalist principles. Yes, the crisis was very enormous. Was very deep. Totalitarian states, nationalism, extreme nationalism, chauvinism, racial nationalism strengthened and denied the Western system of liberties, fascism, national socialism, and also communism, which advised another economic organization model based on the common ownership. Yes, it was very important to find out how to defend the Western system of liberties. After the Second World War, the United Nations was established, and the United Nations organization could achieve to start a functional economic organization. There were established functional economic agencies, which were independent agencies, but cooperated with the Economic and Social Council, and could realize the peacekeeping and sanctions also. So it was a very important achievement in the development of the democratic international community. Europeans also realized the necessity to start functional economic cooperation, and in the period also not only through coordinating agencies, but to establish European United States, to realize federalism, personal federalism in Europe, following the idea of personal federalism, which corresponds to democracy and popular sovereignty. In Europe, the conquest of Europe which framed the perspective of a new Europe in 1848, actually sympathized with federalism and personalist federalism, but the intergovernmentalists were in majority. Europe was reconstructed after the Second World War with American help, American aid policy, and these weakened the federalist, personal federalist renewal, and to create a federalist Europe, which is more suitable to the idea of democracy. You can see what could the Europeans achieve. There are very important achievements because they could establish an intergovernmental and federal union in one institutional structure based on multilevelism and subsidiarity. And there is a sharing of competences. There are exclusive, shared, and cooperating competences in the European Union, a great achievement in the way of developing a democratic world and democratic international relations among the states. So the European Union is a multi-level union, has a multi-level regional union without government, and subsidiarity plays the role of the government. That's the after the war, China and Japan had to continue to fight for freedom and independence. Japan was occupied and with American help could establish constitutional monarchy, and in this constitutional monarchy the monarch was a symbol of the national unity, and the most important was the parliament, the Diet. Japanese could establish further based on their knowledge-based modernization, booming economy. But Japan is modern but not Western. Could safeguard cultural traditions in modernized form and could produce good results by these political structure. Here you can see the constitution. That's you can see all what I told you. China and the Japanese state organization principles are in harmony with the Western world. China developed differently and has not the same state organization principles like the Western world. After the Second World War, the communists could gain in 1949 in China, and China became a communist country influenced by the Stalinist one-party communist system. But the whole system was formed following the ideas of Mao Zedong, was formed on basis of Mao Zedong's thought. Mao Zedong adopted elements from the Western system, the Western system of liberties. Also, he adopted also fundamental rights. But the whole system was a one-party system based on common ownership of a people, and there was, from the Western point of view, there was no pluralism, and in the whole system, it's the most important problem. The human rights, fundamental rights, civic rights could not prevail. He could achieve to become to build out a personal what is it, cult, the personal cult, and he during the Cultural Revolution, when he aimed to change, he aimed to abolish the forces of capitalism in the country and establish a real rule of the workers in cooperation with the peasants. He caused many damage to the Chinese history and the Chinese culture. After his death in 1976, a wise Confucian philosopher, Deng Xiaoping, could gradually dismantle the system of Maoism. His idea was to establish socialism with Chinese characteristics. It meant socialist ideology with capitalist and entrepreneurship. And he emphasized that China must take its own road. This is the only way to safeguard independence. This is the heritage of the colonialism, that Chinese believe that they have to establish an own political system, not the Western one, because they couldn't safeguard independence. And naturally, he emphasized the importance, the stability of the country, and this is why it was necessary to avoid liberalism, to avoid liberalism. And the novelty was in his modernization concept that he allowed limited private economic activity and foreign participation in the economy. It's very interesting, the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, 1982. This Constitution regarding the human right allowed only to the right to criticize. With the Chinese government, it was a power, I speak about the history. It was a power pyramid structure. The National People's Congress and the local People's Congresses worked together. So the most important that there was till the local People's Congresses and the local People's governments, federalist elements there are in the Chinese constitution. But above the provincial government, the whole system is centralized, very centralized. This is why I think that perhaps it is possible to democratize in a long run, the whole system. And I raise the question, I ask whether the Chinese system is a transitional system toward the Western system, because in the Chinese system there are many Western elements. The parliamentary representative system, fundamental rights, economic system adopted Western economic financial models, and this is why I ask whether it is a transitional system or an original system, a so-called Confucian democracy, a Confucian capitalism, or shinocracy, not democracy, I don't know. I ask. The most interesting thing of the story is that all three are highly respect and feel well together in the framework of the United Nations. Japan is very active in the United Nations. China would like to see to direct the world policy, the global world, in the framework of the United Nations. And the European state also. The European Union, but there is a problem because the European Union cannot be the member of the United Nations organization because has no legal personality. There are regional associations in Asia, the Association of the East Asian Nations, which is an intergovernmental association, the Association of the East Asian Nations plus China, Japan, and Korea. China and Japan work together in the framework of this regional union. And this is why I ask, how would it be possible to place in the framework of the United Union these regional organizations? The European Union is a multi-level union. These are intergovernmental unions, and cooperated, the Association of the East Asian Nations, and cooperated with each other through coordinating agencies that are more suitable to the structure of the United Nations organization than the European Union. I ask how would it be possible to involve these regional unions, because I think that the future of the European Union, the future of China and Japan is in an international organization, in the United Nations organization, as regional unions or part of regional unions. I think that it would be necessary to reform the United Nations organization in the direction of multilateralism, and I think that the example of the European multilateralism of the European Union is a good example to reform the United Nations organization. And I think that Europe's future in the global world is to continue on the way of the idea of personal federalism and of peaceful world federation. This is the way for Europe in the future, in how I see it.
Thank you.
Yeah.